And the Oscar goes to...
The Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
All right, this is going to be a fun one, going back to 1930 with the second Academy Awards. We did the first one. Of course, that was our very first broadcast. This one honored the best films released between August 1st to 1928 and July 31st to 1929. So not in a calendar year like subsequent Academy Awards would celebrate. This is kind of in a mid-year to mid-year range. It took place April 3rd, 1930 at an awards banquet in the Coconut Grove of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. And it was actually covered on radio on KNIX in Los Angeles. I don't think any copy exists of the radio broadcast. I could be wrong. I'll have to do some research on that one. It was held nearly 8 months after the eligibility period, which kind of was late. July 31st, 1929 was the final eligible date for the movies. And of course, it wasn't held, the award ceremony, not until April 3rd the next year. They decided the third Academy Awards would be held in November of 1930. That was just a few months afterwards. Can you imagine that? Just maybe 6 months after the Academy Awards air, there's another Academy Awards. But they wanted to bring the award ceremony closer to the relevant time period. They eventually got there, of course. It was the first presentation in which the winners were not announced in advance. Of course, the first Academy Awards, they were announced in advance, so no real surprises. The number of categories for this Academy Awards was reduced from 12 to 7, and it was the only occasion where there were no official nominees. They actually had to do subsequent research that resulted in a list of unofficial or de facto nominees based on records of which films were evaluated by judges. So these weren't the official nominees for Best Picture that we're going to review. They were the assumed nominees based on this research. The movie The Divine Lady is the only film ever to win Best Director without a Best Picture nomination. That excludes the first year where there was an award for Comic Director. Different category, of course. It was the only year that no movie won more than one Oscar. Of course, only 7 categories, so that was a little easier for that to happen back then. And the movie The Broadway Melody became the second of 7 films to win Best Picture without a writing nomination, and the first of 3 to win Best Picture and nothing else. The ceremony was hosted by William C. DeMille, and 5 nominees to review for Best Picture in 1930. You have the winner of Best Picture, The Broadway Melody of 1929, but back then it was just called The Broadway Melody. Of course, there were subsequent ones. The movie Alibi, In Old Arizona, The Hollywood Review, and The Patriot. So let's get to it.
Broadway, you magic street, river of humanity, I have trudged my weary feet down your gay white way, dreaming a million dreams of fame, yearning for you to know my name.
It's the Best Picture winner of the second Academy Awards, The Broadway Melody of 1929, an American pre-code musical film and credited as the first musical film of Hollywood. It was the first sound film to win an Academy Award for Best Picture. Of course, the first winner, Wings, was a silent film. And it was one of the first musicals to feature a Technicolor sequence, which sparked the trend of color being used in a flurry of musicals that would hit the screens in 1929 and 1930. The Technicolor sequence is lost, however. Only the black and white copy survives. So if you watched The Broadway Melody and said, wait, no Technicolor scene that I saw, that's why. It was Hollywood's first all-talking musical, and it was written by Norman Huston and James Gleason from a story by Edmund Golding. And it was directed by Harry Beaumont. Now, the George M. Cohan classic Give My Regards to Broadway is used under the opening establishment shots of New York City, which is the film debut of that song. And it stars Anita Page as Queenie Mahoney, Charles King as Eddie Kearns, Bessie Love as Harriet Hank Mahoney, and Jed Prouty as Uncle Jed. Good thing they used the actor's real first name as his character. Now, the plot centers around a pair of sisters from the vaudeville circuit trying to make it big on Broadway, but matters of the heart complicate the attempt. The music was by Nacio Herb Brown, lyrics by Arthur Freed, and the most popular song from the movie was the song You Were Meant for Me. You were meant for me. You know that song, I'm sure, even if you haven't seen the movie. There was a silent version that was also released of the film because a lot of theaters at that time, back in 1929, were not equipped to handle sound films or talkies, so they did have to make a silent film equivalent to the movie. Contemporary reviews are generally positive for the Broadway Melody. Variety says it has everything a silent picture should have outside of its dialogue. Film Daily said, surefire moneymaker that will drag them in anywhere. That's such a 1920s review, isn't it? Mordaunt Hall of the New York Times says, rather cleverly directed, though somewhat obvious. I'd have to agree with that one. And, of course, it spawned the Broadway Melodies of 1936, which we reviewed in a prior podcast, Broadway Melody of 1938, and the Broadway Melody of 1940. So let's get into our review now of the Broadway Melody of 1929. As far as the plot goes, I give the plot a 2 out of 5. It was kind of the original, I guess, making it big time on Broadway kind of musical. There were plenty of them afterwards, so got to give props to that. However, there were a lot of kind of plot holes and awkward plot points, I think, in this movie that kind of dragged it down a little bit. The two sisters, their relationship with Eddie Kearns seemed very simplistic, especially Hank's reaction when she finds out that her sister is romantically linked with her fiancé. And she's almost kind of fine with that. I know it kind of hit her hard a little bit behind closed doors, but she almost seemed unflinching and completely fine with it, and kind of goading Eddie Kearns on to go get him. Kind of really awkward to me. And I thought the plot, in contrast to later musicals, the plot was not so much of a vehicle for the music as later musicals would be. I mean, compared to later musicals, there's far less musical numbers, I think, in this movie. The acting for the Broadway Melody, I give it 2.5 out of 5. I thought Bessie Love as Hank was the most standout actress. Honorable mention as well to Kenneth Thompson, who played Jacques Warner, who was trying to steal Queenie away. Charles King I thought was okay, but he was a little too showman-y, I thought, and which was probably the style of the time, the vaudeville kind of style. And even that transition from silent films to talkies kind of led to that. Very showman-y. Jed Prouty, too, as Uncle Jed, or Uncle Ned, or Jed, or whatever it was. I guess he played Uncle Ned. I have Uncle Ned written down. There was a stuttering routine. He had a stuttering problem, the character did. I thought that really fell flat, and it was almost a little mean to people who have a speech impediment. Directing and cinematography, a 3.5 out of 5. I thought that's where this movie kind of shined. Lavish sets for the musical numbers. Probably a spectacle of the time. Not really much had been done as far as that goes. And some of the sets were very, very well done and well constructed, especially for 1929. Not as much of a spectacle as later musicals would be, but kind of a good stepping stone to later movies. I thought it was kind of weird that they still use title cards in this film. It's a talking film throughout. However, they still needed every once in a while to intersperse a title card to tell you of a change in venue. For example, if there was a scene on stage where they were doing a musical number, and then after that musical number they did a dressing room scene, there would be a title card that said, later in the dressing room, which is something they really didn't need. I guess they would find that out later. I give the soundtrack a 4 out of 5. I thought that's probably the best marks I give this movie. The movie, The Broadway, or the song, The Broadway Melody, was very iconic for the time. You Were Meant for Me, of course, the standout song, and they used to give my regards to Broadway as part of the opening scene. It was very well done, so 4 out of 5 for soundtrack. And finally, Aura, I give a 3 out of 5. I thought being the first musical, it's memorable for that. Also, the Broadway Melody song I thought was very memorable. I had it stuck in my head for a long period of time after I saw this movie. With some other songs, You Were Meant for Me, are also getting stuck in my head as well. I think the Hank and Queenie love dynamic with Eddie Kearns, for all its flaws, was something I'll remember from this film as well. So, tabulating the results. Plot, a 2. Acting, a 2.5. Directing and cinematography, a 3.5. Soundtrack, a 4. And Aura, a 3. Giving the Broadway Melody of 1929 a total of 15 out of 25 for a score of 60. The 1929 American crime film Alibi, directed by Roland West, with screenplay by West and C. Gardner Sullivan. He adapted the 1927 Broadway stage play Nightstick, which was written by Elaine Stern Carrington, J.C. Nugent, Elliot Nugent, and John Ray. Very, very tough to find this movie. I found it online, jumping through some hoops. Really couldn't get it on Netflix. Would have had to purchase it on DVD. That would have been kind of ridiculous. Glad I was able to find it. Anyway, the alternate titles for this film include The Perfect Alibi and Nightstick. Maybe if I searched for those titles, I may have had better luck finding it, but I don't know. And it stars Chester Morris, who plays Chick Williams. Chester Morris, famous for some radio serials, playing a villain named Boston Blackie. Harry Stubbs plays Buck Bachman. Mae Bush plays Daisy Thomas. And Eleanor Griffith plays Joan Manning Williams. As far as the plot goes, Chick Williams, a Prohibition gangster, rejoins his mob soon after being released from prison. When a policeman is murdered during a robbery, he falls under suspicion. Now, he in fact took Joan, a policeman's daughter, to the theater, snuck out during the intermission to commit the crime, then used her to support his alibi, hence the title. The detective squad employs its most sophisticated and barbaric techniques, including planning an undercover agent in the gang to bring him to justice. So that's the basic plot of Alibi. And not really much other information known about this film. Basically, it's just a very, very short blurb on Wikipedia, and if you go on other sites, really not much to the story, a backstory of this film that I can find. So let's just get right into our review now. For plot, I give the plot a 3.5 out of 5. I really thought this movie, for a 1929 movie, had a really great twist. We're led to believe that, Chick is actually a good guy who may have been framed the first time he was sent to prison. And he was maybe trying to set up to be framed again. Kind of like that Making a Murderer show on Netflix, kind of like that kind of thing. We're thinking it's going toward that kind of ending. However, it completely goes the other way in the midst, and we find out that Chick really isn't a good guy after all, and he's every bit as guilty as the police are accusing him of being. He dates the policeman's daughter to get that alibi. What a really great setup for this plot, and especially for the plot twist. And it really culminates in the police getting justice at the end. Great ending scenes in this film, really wrapping things up, I thought. So decent job on the plot. There were some slow parts in the beginning and the middle. However, the end does pick up quite a bit. Overall acting, I give a 2.5 out of 5. I thought Chester Morris was pretty good as an evil wrongdoer, very convincing, and he kind of does that Edward G. Robinson, thing, like the say, he does that kind of thing, which was, I guess, popular at the time among actors. The police officer roles were very well portrayed as well. My big problem with the acting, however, goes to the guy who played the drunk undercover cop. Way over the top. I know he was playing a drunk guy. He was playing a guy playing a drunk guy. Is what the actor was doing. However, way over the top drunk. Like too slapstick, too vaudeville drunk. Not convincing enough. Obviously acting like he was drunk and not really getting into the role. Not that exo can actually drink. Mae Bush, too, the character Daisy Thomas. Her role was a little bit of a head scratcher. I don't know what she was there for. I guess just to be part of the criminal gang and just be the seedy woman of the gang or something like that. Directing and cinematography, I give really good marks. I give that a 4 out of 5. I thought it had a really great use of shadow and really well filmed at the end with the suspense scenes. My only gripe with the directing and cinematography may have something to do with the fact that the film just hasn't been able to be restored perfectly. And I think that a lot of the dialogue is very, very tough to hear and very inaudible. And again, that's just the wearing of time. Soundtrack, I give a 2.5 out of 5. Nothing really memorable for the soundtrack. Some decent nightclub musical numbers in the film, but the incidentals were kind of just there, so nothing great, nothing terrible either. And overall aura of Alibi, I give a 3.5 out of 5. I think the things that really stuck with me were the ending scenes, the shooting of this guy, this drunk undercover cop, and then the kind of plot twist at the end with Chick getting fake shot by Caps, passing out, and then trying to make his getaway and getting really shot at the end of the film. And of course, the crazy drunk cop was, in a negative kind of way, something that really I kind of take away. Maybe the number one thing I take away from the movie. So let's go through our tally here. We have 3.5 for plot, 2.5 for acting, 4 for directing and cinematography, 2.5 for soundtrack, and 3.5 for aura, giving Alibi a total of 16 out of 25 for a score of 64. Okay, a very unique film to the 1930 Oscars. It's the Hollywood Review of 1929, an American pre-code musical comedy film is what it's listed as. But it's more of just a variety and sketch comedy couple of hours, basically. Something that you might find on TV in the 50s and 60s. But of course, without television back in the 1920s, they put this on the big screen. It was released by MGM, and it's the studio's second feature-length musical of their earliest sound films. It was produced by Harry Rapf and Irving Thalberg and directed by Charles Reisner. And it features nearly all of MGM's stars in a 2-hour review that includes 3 segments in Technicolor. Amazing that they did Technicolor segments in 1929. Now, your masters of ceremonies, the hosts of the event, are Conrad Nagel and Jack Benny. Now, Jack Benny's all over the review here, so I would say Conrad Nagel a distant second master of ceremonies. It also stars Joan Crawford, Lionel Barrymore, Marion Davies, Gus Edwards, and many, many more. Just a countless cast of MGM stars from back in 1929. Basically, a plotless parade of variety acts. Some of the different things you have going on, you have Laurel and Hardy. They were on the big screen. They play inept musicians. It was also the debut of the song Singin' in the Rain, which was of course made iconic by the Gene Kelly movie in the 1950s, some years later. And the only MGM stars that were missing were Greta Garbo, as well as Raymond Navarro and Lon Chaney Sr. So there's really not much to talk about. This was another movie that was really, really hard to find. I had to go deep into Google and come up with it before I would have been forced to purchase the DVD or just wait until it became available. So I did watch it, and here's my review. I have to give the plot a non-score. I cannot factor the plot in because there really was not a plot. It's basically a sketch, variety, musical, comedy kind of movie that really doesn't have a plot, so it wouldn't be fair to actually kind of judge this. It would be impossible to judge this on a plot, so plot is taken out of the factor here for this movie. Acting, I do give a 3.5 out of 5. I thought Jack Benny really came across very well as far as his humor goes. I was kind of wondering whether his humor was going to be too dated to enjoy in 2017, but when I watched it, I thought his humor was great. I really thought there were jokes that were funny, made me laugh out loud. This is a 1929 movie, and it made me laugh out loud. He kind of was a bit of an insult comic from back in the day, but he also made fun of himself, which was always a plus, too. And I'm really kind of impressed. I was impressed by her with the Broadway Melody, but I was also impressed with Bessie Love in this movie, too. Kind of a shame that she didn't become a bigger star. She was a little before her time, I think. I think if she had kind of risen to fame in the 30s and 40s, she may have had a superstar kind of status. But she really was a woman of a lot of talents, and she really kind of showcased that in this review as well. Joan Crawford making her big screen debut in this film, not really that impressive to me, but she went on to do some amazing things later. Directing and cinematography, I give a 4 out of 5. I thought the stage presentation was really good. It kind of almost felt like you were in the audience on Broadway or, somewhere watching a really, really elaborate musical play, rather elaborate sketch musical. And I thought the Technicolor segments were really, really well done, really great. There's a scene where Romeo and Juliet, or you're acting out the Romeo and Juliet scenes from Shakespeare, and the director is Lionel Barrymore. Of course, you remember as Mr. Potter from the It's a Wonderful Life film. Well, he stops the scene, and he says that he gets a note from Hollywood saying that you got to hip it up, you got to make it, so that your lingo is right with the times, rather than this Shakespeare lingo. So that's what they do. They recreate the scenes from Romeo and Juliet using like 1920s hip kind of lingo, which is weird because that's so outdated now. The Singing in the Rain segment was very nicely shot as well. Soundtrack, I give a 3 out of 5. I think the most memorable tune, obviously, is going to be Singing in the Rain from this film. They do a rehash of the Broadway Melody songs, You Were Meant for Me. I know Charles King's in the movie quite a bit. Of course, he was, as you know from our past review, he was in the Broadway Melody in 1929. Other than that, the other music in this film really isn't too memorable to me. It is a Hollywood musical, but Singing in the Rain and You Were Meant for Me were probably the big standouts here. And overall aura, I give a 3 out of 5. I like Jack Benny's humor. I think that really kind of withstood the test of time. That was a bit of a surprise. Of course, the Singing in the Rain skit is something that's etched into my mind, kind of iconic. I know seeing documentaries of the movie Singing in the Rain, they always kind of harken back to the Hollywood Review of 1929. And the Romeo and Juliet skit, I think, was the most entertaining for me. So let's tally up these results. As far as plot, remember, plot not applicable here. Acting, I give a 3.5 out of 5. Directing, a 4. Soundtrack, a 3. And aura, a 3. That'll give the Hollywood Review of 1929 a total of 13.5 out of 20. And we'll round that up to a score of 68.
If it is to be the end, I want to know that you are thinking only of me. My beautiful angel.
It's the 1928 American pre-code Western film In Old Arizona, the first talking movie that was shot outdoors. Doesn't seem like much of a thing today, but back in 1928, that was gigantic. It was directed by Irving Cummings and Raoul Walsh, based on the character of the Cisco Kid in the story The Caballero's Way. That was an O. Henry novel. And aside from being the first talkie to be filmed outdoors, they had an extensive use of authentic locations. They really went on location with this film, which they didn't do very often, if ever, in many movies up to that point. They filmed in Bryce Canyon National Park, also Zion National Park, in Utah, San Fernando Mission, and the Mojave Desert in California. I wonder what the travel was like for the actors and the entire crew, for that matter. Back in the 20s, it was probably a little more difficult to get from place to place, obviously. So the movie contributed to creating the image of the singing cowboy, like the Roy Rogers kind of Gene Autry kind of cowboy. This cowboy was a Hispanic cowboy, but played by a white guy, of course. It's the 20s after all. It stars Warder Baxter, who won Best Actor for his role as the Cisco Kid. Edmund Lowe is in the movie, as well as Dorothy Burgess. And as far as the plot goes, the Cisco Kid is this notorious bandit. He's really, really feared. He's feared so much that he doesn't even have to fire his gun to rob a stagecoach in a scene in the beginning. He has a girlfriend named Tanya, who's played by Burgess. She often accuses him of being unfaithful, but he assures her that he loves only her, and he even writes a song about her in her name. Then the movie kind of shifts to this cavalry sergeant, Mickey Dunn, who's kind of a seedy character, kind of almost a low-life kind of guy who seems to be just in it for the money and not a good guy. I don't know whether that's what they were trying to go for in the movie, but it's kind of how he is depicted here. He arrives with a mission to capture or kill the Mexican Robin Hood. Cisco matches wits with him and discovers an unexpected betrayal at the end. So a little bit of a plot twist, one of the early incarnations of a plot twist. Director Raoul Walsh was set to direct and also star in the film, but he had to abandon. Kind of a freak accident happened. A jackrabbit jumped through his windshield and cost him an eye and his career as well. Can't work without an eye, I guess, in the 20s. He wore an eye patch, as a matter of fact, the entire rest of his life. So let's get into our review now for In Old Arizona from 1928. As far as the plot goes, I give the plot a 3 out of 5. There's a very interesting love triangle story here between the Cisco Kid as well as the cavalry sergeant, played by Edmund Lowe, and, of course, Dorothy Burgess's character, in that she's with the Cisco Kid, but for money and to get out of town and to get to New York City, she kind of hooks up with this cavalry sergeant guy, and weird love triangle. The Cisco Kid finds out, and all hell breaks loose, basically. The questions throughout the movie is, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? Is the Cisco Kid, who's a robber, who doesn't really have to resort to violence, is he the good guy? Because he kind of seems like a warm, kind of guy, whereas the sergeant kind of seems like a cold-hearted guy. And I don't know, after the Hollywood codes were put in some years later, if that would have been allowable. You want the robber, I guess, to be the bad guy at all times. Interesting plot twist at the end. It's more conventional by today's standards, but one that'll kind of keep you interested in the movie throughout. So 3 out of 5 for plot. Acting, I only give a 2 out of 5. I thought we have this kind of 1920s style of acting that's extremely exaggerated. Ethnic stereotypes are pushed to the nth degree. You have this Italian barber who's just so flamboyantly Italian, it's not even funny. Cisco Kid, played by a white guy, as I mentioned before, over the top in his Hispanic accent. Edmund Lowe comes off as a gangster, playing this cavalry sergeant. And he even throws in a couple, he throws in a couple of those, which was par for the course back in 1928, I'm sure. Directing and cinematography, I give a 4 out of 5. I thought it was really groundbreaking for its time. I mean, great outdoor shots. I mean, you had some really vast sets of great mountain areas that must have been pretty breathtaking for those who had never been out there, which I'm sure a lot of people from the East Coast, the vast majority, had never been out west at that point in time in the 20s. It was a lot more difficult to get out there. The movie did have more of a kind of a roughing it feel than a lot of those movies did back in those days. Great motifs with the indoor sets as well, I think, to kind of really denote the rustic feel of the Old West as well. Soundtrack, I give a 3 out of 5. I thought the main theme was very, very fitting for the movie. They did kind of repeat it over and over again. Not too many incidental songs or musical interludes in the film, so not really much to judge as far as that goes. So 3 out of 5 for soundtrack. And overall aura for In Old Arizona, I give a 3 out of 5. I thought the plot twist at the end, the love triangle plot twist and how it all kind of wraps up, including a really great quote by the Cisco Kid at the very end of the movie, really kind of makes this movie memorable to me. The exaggerated acting on the downside makes it memorable to me, too. The she, that kind of stuff. And there's a rather long scene at a barbershop. I was talking about the Italian barber. That's a little memorable as well. They're there face-to-face with the Cisco Kid, the barber, and this sergeant guy or private guy or cavalry sergeant guy, and they don't even know it's him at the time. And it's all of is he going to get discovered? Is he not going to get discovered? So there's that question too. So tallying up the results, we got 3 for plot, 2 for acting, 4 for directing and cinematography, 3 for soundtrack, and 3 for aura, giving In Old Arizona a total of 15 out of 25 for a score of 60. Okay, the 1928 semi-biographical film The Patriot, directed by Ernst Lubitsch, released by Paramount, and was mainly a silent film for the most part. It did have a synchronized soundtrack and some talking sequences, but mostly kind of a hearkening back to the times prior when it was just silent. It was written by Hans Crowley, and it's an adaptation of 2 different plays. You have Paul I by Dmitry Merezlevsky, and The Patriot by Ashley Dukes, based on the novel Der Patriot by Alfred Newman. So it took the title of The Patriot, obviously, so I guess it favors that story a little more, possibly. And it's the biographical story of Emperor Paul I of Russia. It stars Emil Jannings as Tsar Paul I. Emil Jannings, a very interesting story from early Hollywood. He became a Nazi sympathizer, I believe, later, and kind of exiled from the United States. Florence Veeder plays Countess Osterman. Louis Stone plays Count Palin. And the movie was remade in France in 1938 with the exact same title. Kind of a Game of Thrones story a little bit with this story. Jannings plays a mad king who's kind of going senile, and his best friend wants to kind of keep him alive, and everyone's kind of telling his friend, you got to kill him, you have his ear, you got to kill him. And I think he ends up doing that at the end. The movie won Best Writing at the Academy Awards, and it's the only silent film nominated for Best Picture in 1930, and was the last to receive a nomination until The Artist, which of course won Best Picture in 2012. We've done that before. But here's the deal. I've not seen this movie. Why? Well, because the movie doesn't exist anymore. Only pieces of this film are left, at least to our knowledge. I don't know if there's a hidden vault somewhere that someone might find this film at or something, but it doesn't exist, so I can't watch it. I can't even, piece it together myself. This, however, is the only Best Picture nominee for which no complete or near-complete copy has been found. So I guess there are near-complete copies of other Best Picture nominees. I don't know. We'll find out when we get there. But I can't review this film. So this film, The Patriot from 1928, has no score. Okay, so since 1929, or 1930, I guess you want to call it, because it's the Academy Awards that were held in 1930, has 5 nominees, and 4 of them I was able to review. The Patriot, as I mentioned, I was not able to review. Very, very tough year to pick a winner here. I know the Broadway Melody of 1929 was the winner, and I rated that a 60. So going by the movie that I rated highest, kind of strange. I would have given the award to the Hollywood Review of 1929. While kind of a pedestrian film in retrospect, it was very entertaining. I thought the job that was done by Jack Benny was funny. He was on point, and all the musical numbers really was a good kind of nostalgic trip down yesteryear to find what they were doing back in the 1920s, or I guess 1929 is when the review came out. So kind of a weird grouping of films for the second Academy Awards. The first one, there was so much more hoopla with those films, and some great iconic films as well. And maybe because they spanned a couple of years where they were able to do the nominations. I don't know, but 1930, not quite as great as far as the second Academy Awards goes. Now, I think the third Academy Awards were held later in 1930s, which is really strange, before they went to the year-to-year path. But we'll be doing the third Academy Awards one of these days as well. But as far as the second Academy Awards, I would have given it to the Hollywood Review of 1929. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of the How I Would Have Voted podcast. Next time, we'll pick another year. Will it be a present-day year? Will it be one from the 1930s? I don't know. See you then.